I don't know about you, but as we've been going through these Old Testament prophets, the message seems to be pretty similar. People are continuing to disobey God or to not put Him as their top priority, and that's leading to problems for them, and God asks them to come back and promises never to leave them. And the same thing is true here for Haggai, although this one is more about priorities than it is about behavior. So Haggai was actually a post-exilic prophet, which means his prophecy happens around the time when the people are back from exile, they're in Jerusalem, and they're there trying to rebuild their life. These people came back after King Darius said, God has allowed me or told me to rebuild his temple in Jerusalem. So he allowed, or he sent people back, and a lot of people did go back. Now, as you can imagine, as the people went back, there was so much joy, so much anticipation, so much expectation that things were going to be amazing again, and life was going to go back to the way it was, to the stories that they had before about how awesome it was, and this understanding that they would be able to go back and to enjoy life as it was a joyful time. But it didn't take long for some of that joy, that anticipation, that expectation to wear off, because things were not like they were before. And life seemed to be really, really hard still. The people were poor. They had to rebuild the city, rebuild their homes, clear their vineyards, replant their crops. And on top of that, it didn't seem like the crops were producing anything. Like life was really, really hard for them. And when Haggai comes along, he notices that yes, things were hard for them, but he also notices where their priorities have led them to focus their attention. They were more intent on their own lives than they were on God and what He wanted for them. The anticipation and expectation they had was not that they could go back to the land and be God's people again, but that they would be free to be their own people, to do what they wanted and to live in comfort. And when that didn't show up, they started to grumble and complain. This brings me to the key verse in Haggai. This is Haggai 1 verse 4. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains in a ruin? God is basically saying, where are your priorities? And for me, this message hit pretty hard. One of the reasons this hit pretty hard is because I can see myself in the people of Israel, just with what has been going on with the pandemic, with restrictions lifting and then reversing and coming back down tighter again. There's this sense of anticipation and excitement. Yes, we get to gather together as God's people, and yes, we get to enjoy life as it was, and there's this expectation and excitement, but then it's been settling in the last little while that there's still a lot of work, and it's not like it was before, or maybe even what was before wasn't all that great to begin with, because maybe we weren't doing the right kinds of things. Maybe even then we weren't putting God first. And now, particularly, it seems like so many of us, myself included, are kind of wrapped up in our own lives, and God seems to be on the side. He seems to be put on the back burner. Now, I fully recognize that the modern church is not the temple of God. There's all kinds of things that happen in the meantime, such as Jesus coming, saying that He basically is the temple, that it will be destroyed and then rebuilt, and then that we become, as His people, actually a living temple. In Peter, it talks about how we are living stones being built into an amazing house for God to dwell within. But that means then that the temple, or the house of God, yes, it's a church, but it's more about the church community. And I don't think that many of us are putting the church community first. But what about you? What do you think? Does this indictment of Haggai ring true for you? Is this a time for you to be living in your paneled houses while the house of God remains in ruin? Is this a time for us to consider how we can make our own lives better while maybe our own church community is languishing? Or maybe this is a time for us to invest in our church communities and to engage with what's going on.